Learning licks can sometimes feel like memorizing formulas in maths class. You learn it, but it doesn't always really stick in your mind. Sometimes we pick up a lick from YouTube or we find it on a tab book or something like that. We play it a few times and then it just goes in one ear and completely disappears out the other one. Sometimes, rarely, we actually find a lick that we enjoy playing. We play it over and over and over, and then eventually, for some reason, it becomes stale and we don't really know how to get more variation out of it. The problem we have is that no one really teaches us how we're supposed to get the most out of a lick. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to truly absorb licks into your playing and expand them all the way across the fretboard so we can add some variation into them so we never actually run out of ideas in our improvisation. So we all have that moment where we learn a cool lick, but we can't really seem to remember it later when we're trying to improvise. So what are we supposed to do to fix that? Let's take this example of a basic simple blues lick. We have a really simple basic blues lick. You might have heard it in a bunch of other songs before. There's nothing kind of groundbreaking going on here, right? The very first step we want to be doing with this lick is visualizing how it connects to scale shapes we already know. I think this is a pretty good example because it's literally just inside that pentatonic box, right? Again, if you can't relate this lick to something you already know, something familiar, it's going to be very difficult to remember. So whenever you kind of improvise in the future and you're using that box shape, you know, oh, I can also use this now. You want to be able to attach both of them together. And again, once you're able to fit this inside of this box shape, inside of these scale shapes, it gives you the ability to transpose them anywhere on the guitar. So I could move this over here. Right? That's why it's so important to be able to attach these to your scale shapes that you already know how to play on the instrument. Again, let's dive a little bit deeper into this lick. So we kind of know where it is. We know how it fits inside the scale shape. Now what do we want to do? So you want to see how each note of this lick relates to the chord that you're going to be playing it over the top of. We want to see how each interval kind of interacts with that root note, okay? So for example, in this riff, or lick even, we start on the minor third over here on the high E string. Then we move over to the root again. Then we play the minor seventh. Then we play the fifth. And then we bend into the fifth again. So that's going to teach you oh, these are actually the same notes over here, right? And then we end on that minor third, right? So this is going to give you a lot deeper, a lot better of an understanding of the fretboard and the notes inside the scale shapes you actually know how to play, right? And again, when you know where your intervals are located on the instrument, it's going to make it a lot easier to sound more intentional and melodic with your phrases. And again, you're going to start to pick up on patterns that loads of other licks are using. Usually they'll start on a chord tone, so a root or a third or a fifth. And once you start picking up on enough patterns, you're going to be comfortable with creating and making your own licks rather than just copying and memorizing what someone else has come up with. So now that we understand the kind of structure of this riff, where it fits inside of a scale shape, and what intervals are being used over that chord we're using in the lick, what else are we supposed to do? We're supposed to look at where else on the fretboard we can play this lick, right? We don't want to be limited to only ever playing in one position. And again, we've all been there before where we only really know how to play a phrase inside of just that basic pentatonic box, and you find yourself running dry with your improvisation very quickly, and then you find yourself in that kind of embarrassing moment where you don't really know what to play at all and you just kind of go blank, right? It's quite awkward, right? So what do we need to do to fix this? We need to figure out how to take this and play it in multiple positions across the fretboard. Now, that might sound kind of quite confusing and quite daunting and quite time consuming, but it's actually a lot easier than you think. As a general rule of thumb, most basic pentatonic licks can be found in the pentatonic shape either above where you're currently playing or below where you're currently playing. So again, let's take the same phrase again. Alright, this is the original position we learnt it, but also, which is also in this kind of original pentatonic box, right? But we can also play it in that box shape below. So right, we have, and then we can play the same lick over here, an octave down. So again, just the one shape below holds that lick as well. And again, the exact same process works for the scale shape above. So we originally played it here. We can do the exact same thing in the scale shape above. And again, this principle applies for every single position you find this lick in the scale, right? So let's say we learnt this over here. We can also find this in the scale position above this one. So we're playing in this scale shape now. But we can also find a way to play that lick in this scale shape. So we have... Again, these licks are hiding in your scale positions all the way across the fretboard. And again, if we backtrack to what we talked about earlier, if you know where your intervals are located inside this riff, and you've kind of analyzed with a microscope kind of what's going on inside your phrase, you're going to be able to like see where that's happening in these different scale positions as well. So like if I started over on the minor third over here, you can use that information to go like, oh, the start of this lick in this position, that must mean this is also the minor third. Or like over here, this is also the minor third. Or here, the minor third's over here. Again, it's going to give you a lot deeper of an understanding for where your notes and intervals are located across all your scale shapes across the fretboard. We really want to break out the habit of only ever knowing how to play anything just inside that box shape. You want to break free from your comfort zone a little bit here to learn more about the instrument. So now that we've gone through the process of learning a lick, looking at it on a deeper level and looking at what intervals are being played over the top of our chord, and also learning that lick in multiple different positions across the fretboard, what are we supposed to do to translate that into music when we're improvising? It's one thing learning and practicing something, but actually making music with it is a completely different story that we're often quite lost with. I think a problem most of us have, a common misconception among guitarists that are trying to figure out how to improvise, is that they're under the impression that in order to improvise, you need to chain different licks together exactly the way that you learned them and practiced them. Kind of like the same way an actor has to memorize his lines and a script when performing for a scene or a play. This isn't the case. That's not really how it works. It's much more like this. The greatest musicians, they're kind of like great chefs. They don't have to follow a recipe perfectly to the T, right? They can kind of edit and modify things. They can add their own flavor, change out an ingredient, maybe change out the weight of the ingredient. They don't have to follow things absolutely perfectly. You want to use the lick as a guide, right? Like the recipe is a guide. It's not a rule that must not be broken. It's something that you're allowed to modify and edit. So let's look at a new lick. I'm going to play this one over here. Right? And let's assume that we practice all the previous steps where we've gone over how it fits inside of a scale shape, the intervals that are being used, and like finding how to play it in a different position. What are we supposed to do to make that sound musical? So a framework that I like to use that I find is quite helpful is breaking down each lick into a call and a response. I'm sure many of us have heard of this term before or the idea, but we don't really know how to use it into our playing. So let's break down this lick into two different sections. We have the call, which is the first half, and then we have the response to that. So we can do two different things here. We can keep the call the same and then change the response. So the call is always going to be this. But instead of having to go, we could use different notes inside that pentatonic scale shape. Right, just climb up different kind of positions and stuff like that. Just mess around with the other notes you have available to you. So I could go like, and then I could even like work my way down an octave into a different position that I've learned to play this lick. And again, you're going to become a lot more fluent on the fretboard by doing that. It's going to become a lot easier to get more variation out of these licks when you kind of bounce and flow between two different like octaves, and think about like modifying them slightly. Again, keep something similar, keep something the same. It's not like you're playing something completely different every single time you play. You have a kind of general idea or a motif that you have in mind, but you're adding some kind of slight variation to the recipe slightly. And again, we can also invert this same process where instead of keeping the call the same and modifying the response, we could modify the call to change it to like, and then like the response could be always the same, right? So let's see what we can do with that. We can go, and again, flow between these different positions as well, these different octaves, right? Again, you always want to keep something slightly similar and then modify and tweak something slightly. I think we get into this kind of problem where we run through these different scale shapes and we play all these different ideas that kind of have no relation or connection to each other. And we kind of get lost with our improvisation. It sounds like we're noodling. It doesn't sound too musical. When you use the lick that you learn as a kind of guideline, a recipe, and then just like tweak certain small parts of that recipe, it's going to be a lot easier to kind of improvise and mess around and sound more musical with these licks. And again, you're going to find it harder or less common to run into that problem where like you start playing something and then you're like, oh, what do I play next? And your mind goes blank, and then it's kind of embarrassing. So it's always going to give you some more like fresh ideas when you understand how to modify these licks. So when we put all of these different ideas together, suddenly one lick can become 10,000 different phrases instead of just one. As Bruce Lee quite famously once said, "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 licks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one lick 10,000 times." I'm pretty sure that's what you said, right? So you want to think about practicing one lick 10,000 times and finding different ways to play it rather than learning 10,000 different licks one way and trying to chain them all together. So stop memorizing licks mindlessly, understand how they fit into your scale shape so you can recall them and transpose them into any key. Kind of look a bit deeper into that lick and see what intervals are being played over the top of a chord. Find them in multiple different positions across the neck to become more fluent on the instrument, and also understand that you're allowed to modify these things. Keep the call and response framework in mind. Keep either the call the same and change the response slightly, or keep the response the same and change the call a bit. And again, if you master all of these steps, you're going to find it a lot harder to feel stuck when you're improvising across the fretboard. If you want to take these licks and apply them to some more interesting and fancy sounding chord progressions, then you're going to want to check out this video that I've made for you over here. It's all about taking boring and uninteresting chords and finding simple yet creative ways to make them sound a lot more beautiful and elaborate. Again, you can also get all the tab and the diagrams shown in today's video completely for free in my free school community. There is a link to join in the description. There's also another link for a YouTube video which covers how I've been helping our community members master the triads all the way across the fretboard with quite a bit of success. If you're interested in learning more about the triads and mastering them across the neck, I think you're going to want to check out that video too.